colleagues, and good afternoon, one and all, and a very warm welcome to this very, very exciting topic of large language models, smart work or academic doping. Just the title alone is enough to get one warmed up for the afternoon. And it is indeed my pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of our academy to this, which is one of many in a series of webinars that ASSAf is hosting around the topic of artificial intelligence and all other things considered. We are very privileged to have a star cast of speakers and to be facilitated by none other than Professor Majozi. His biographic sketch will make you fall off your seat, so make sure you are seated comfortably when you read it. I'm not going to read it out in full, but needless to say, he's really a man who uses his total skill sets in serving society. He currently holds the position of Executive Dean in the Faculty of Engineering at Wits, among other portfolios within that university, has many prestigious awards, the author of over 300 publications, and we are very privileged at the Academy to have him at the seat of our council. His leadership and his commitment to seeing things through is unmatched, and I have the great pleasure of inviting him to facilitate today. But before I go away, I want to thank you all for giving up your afternoon. I see the numbers are rising as we get into the webinar. And I am really, really looking forward to listening to the experts share their insights on the topic with us. And I hope you have your snacks and your drinks and everything close by so that you don't have to move away once we get going. With that, colleagues, I now have the privilege and pleasure of handing over to Professor Majozi. Professor Majozi, welcome, and over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Professor Soodyall, for that kind introduction. I hope I am audible to everyone. I just want to greet all attendees on board across the globe, but in particular, I must greet and welcome our panel members who have been selected from various fields of expertise to engage with and enlighten us on this topic at hand, which is large language models, smart work, or academic doping, as Prof. Soodyall has mentioned. We've got 4 panel members who I'm going to introduce to you briefly. And again, because of our time constraints, I'm not going to read their full biographical sketches, but I'm going to summarize just for the sake of time. We have Professor Morris, who most of us here know very well. She's the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation at Wits University in South Africa. She's a globally recognized expert in HIV vaccine research with a career spanning over 3 decades. She's an A-rated NRF scientist, and she has published over 290 papers with an H index of 74, and she's listed among the world's most highly cited researchers. Prof. Morris is a member of several prestigious scientific academies globally and has mentored more than 50 postgraduate students and postdoctoral researchers throughout her distinguished career. We also have in the panel Dr. Nicky, who is currently the Director of Teaching and Learning, Strategy, Projects, and Portfolio Performance at UNISA with a background in curriculum development and business management education. He has played key roles in technology-enhanced learning and change management initiatives at the university, UNISA. Currently, Dr. Tjano co-chairs UNISA's AI task team responsible for developing and implementing AI policies and guidelines across the institution. Also in the panel, we have Professor Anne-Hendrik Verhoef, who is the Director of the School of Philosophy at Northwest University, with research interests in ethics and academic integrity. He co-founded and chairs the Community of Practice for Academic Integrity at Northwest University and leads the university's Artificial Intelligence Steering Committee. Anna's work spans academic integrity in higher education and the implications of emerging technologies in academic settings. And lastly, but definitely not the least, we have Professor Dave Walwyn, who is Professor Emeritus at the University of Pretoria, specializes in interdisciplinary research at the intersection of techno-economics, innovation policy, and socio-technical transitions. His expertise spans sustainability transitions, renewable energy, science, and innovation policy. He is also involved in health technology localization. Though he's retired, Prof. Walwyn remains active in research and student supervision in these fields that have just been mentioned. Welcome to our panelists. We are looking forward to the knowledge that we are going to share with us, your experiences in the space of AI in general, and of course, large language models in particular. I will now give each of the speakers about 10 minutes to just take us through their experiences on the subject, and I'll go in this particular order. I'll start off with Professor N. Verhoef from Northwest University. He will be followed by Dr. Nicky Tjano, who I've just introduced now from UNISA. Then it will be Professor Lynn Morris, and lastly, we'll have Prof. Dave Walwyn to give us their experiences along the lines of the subject matter that we are discussing this afternoon. And it is up to them. It will either be by presentation via PowerPoint, or it could just be verbally if they so wish, but we strictly have about 10 minutes for each. So I'll hand over to you without any further ado. Anne, if you can take us through your presentation.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity. If you can show my first slide, I think you're already at the end. Thank you. So can you hear me and see me, Prof. Majozi? Is it fine?
Yes,
thank you. I'll continue. Colleagues, I'll concentrate or focus mainly on artificial intelligence and the problem of academic integrity. And my focus would be and I have to focus about the ethical and responsible use of AI, because as the topic said, we don't want any doping, as we have in sport with unfair advantage. But for certain athletes, we don't want cheating with students presenting AI work as their own. And my presentation would be mainly focused in on the experiences and processes here at Northwest University, which we aim to have as fair and educative, and then focus quickly on practical issues. And I'll just show you, or if you need more information, you're welcome to email me. So to go quickly, because we have 10 minutes, of course, we have to start that most universities start at that point want to embrace, and the same with the Northwest University, AI. We cannot ignore it. We have to realize the future impact of AI and the reality of it. And I think we definitely, within that context, we take an educative approach. And that's the tricky part. What is an ethical way and a responsible way of dealing with AI in higher education? And the first thing is that we need clear guidelines. And we developed that, and I think most universities have done that. That's not a difficult thing. You will find ours on the, I hear there's some other sound, but I'll continue. You will find ours under on our website, very visible for students, under current students, under academic integrity. Why responsible need? There's sometimes the comparison with the use of a calculator, of using AI, but that's not right. AI is not always right as a calculator, so we need to use to learn how to use it responsibly. And more literature shows that a basic subject knowledge is needed for sufficient AI use. So there's a lot of work that goes with responsible and ethical use. So while there's agreement about the positive value of the use of AI, there's also the question what to do if AI is prohibited. And I think there's a lot of work, of course, as I said, how to use it, But sometimes it's needed to say, no, students are not allowed to use it. And then the problem starts. Then we have to figure out how can we make sure there's not doping like we have it in sport. That gives some students an unfair advantage and undermines the integrity of what we're doing in academia. And I think in this case, an educative intervention is needed. I think as with sport, that we should start there. So what's our experiences and the processes at Northwest regarding AI and AI? Well, we found, and I think that's in line with most research, that to avoid unethical use of AI, no assignments or assessments should be done outside the classroom. That's the only way. If we want to make sure there's 100% avoidance of AI misuse or cheating. But again, that's not always possible. That's the tricky thing. We cannot always have sit down and invigilating assessments. So the question is then, how should we then manage this risk of possible doping? As we see in the sport world, they're already doing it with certain tests and try to get rid of the cheating in sport. And the same problems, or perhaps more problems, occur with AI in higher education, because as with sport, new products are developed, new AIs are developed, new tests are needed. So it's a difficult task. And our task is, and I agree with all my colleagues, our task is not to police the whole time where AI is perhaps used to cheat. It's too negative to approach, but sometimes it's needed. So we chose at this university for a much more educative approach to try and create a fair environment where we really enhance a culture of academic integrity. And we developed, as I showed you on the screen, a system ASSAf, which stands for Academic Integrity IT System Application. And it works well. I can show some stats if I have time. But in this system, we do try to detect and report and manage and take an educative approach with the unethical use of AI. And it always starts with the lecturer or the marker, and it should be a subject specialist who marks. That's more and more the case, because without being a subject specialist, you will not be able to identify unethical use of AI. And let's just show, there are a lot of things you can look for: the style of a text, irrelevant answers, sometimes the prompts are even included, strange references, or sometimes it's too good to be true. And a subject specialist picks this up quickly. Also with postgraduate students, you will quickly see if a student's work, how it compares with his previous work, or the general quality of the work. But this is not enough. If a lecturer or marker has to pick it up, AI is getting better and better. And I've read this morning about a study in the UK at various universities there that 94% of the AI submissions went through undetected by lecturers. So what we have at this university, and I think this might be the solution, is to use also detection tools, not as proof, but as a type of help to detect it. The problem is, though, that students also use their own type of tools. In our case, we use Turnitin AI Similarity Index, but students will use Zero Chat or Zero GPT. And then you get within diagnostics problems and arguments. So what I want to say is we need also a process and a system that manages this fairly. If a university decided on one tool and stick with it, the conversation can start at least. And what we developed within ASSAf is that any report of unethical use would be within this system to make sure students are not disadvantaged, because we know there are false positives with many of these tools, and it should be fair. Again, detection tools should not just be thrown out because there might be some problems with it. It should rather be interpreted correctly by lecturers, as with plagiarism. We've seen that the percentage alone is not an indication of a possible transgression. And then the interpretation should be done according to the guidelines of the specific university for the ethical use of AI. So the detection of unethical use of AI should first be followed then by an educative intervention and not a punitive one. A punitive one or disciplinary one, we quickly see that legal matters follow. It's difficult to prove. It doesn't really create a culture of academic integrity. So that's why we chose for, first of all, an educative approach. So it works like this. First, if a lecturer picks up some, that's the next slide important, some problems, the lecturer will report it on our system. It's an online system. We calculated it takes about 22 seconds average to report a student by the lecturer. Then it's out of the hand of the lecturer. The student will receive email and a link to do an online academic integrity course. The student will receive an email that will say, no, this mark must be withheld until the course is completed. The student may say no, he's innocent or she, and ask for a review. That's part of the process. A good thing is a record is kept of all these transgressions and across faculties, across the students' whole life cycle at the university. So if you cheat in one module, it will also be picked up in another one in another faculty. If a student asks for a review and say, for example, he or she used Grammarly or something else, a review committee will look at the reasons and the proofs the student provide, for example, previous versions, and they can overrule then the finding of the lecturer if needed. But in the last 6 months, we had about 700 students reported at Northwest University for unethical use of AI, and only 5 asked for a review. So it shows you how quickly they, if they transgressed in this way. And of course, we want them to be able to ask for a review and take the objections seriously. If students transgress again, then an in-person online intervention takes place with our writing center, one-to-one with these students, to ask them and talk to them about what happened. With a third transgression, so you'll see there are various educative interventions, but only with the third one, it would be referred to our judicial services to investigate it further. Then our judicial office already have a record of all the transgressions, the educative interventions that took place, all the reports, documents on the system, and then they can investigate the third transgressions with expert tools like Author. That's part of the originality package of Turnitin, and look further also with the help of Turnitin, with their experts at their office to see, as with doping in sport, if a legal case should follow or not. So we are trying to create an environment or culture of academic integrity through an educative approach at Northwest University. The question is it sustainable? Can we and will we cope with AI that's developing so quickly and it's becoming such a problem? Well, we found there are some issues. And the main one is some lecturers are afraid to use the system and are still not using it. They don't want to punish the students. So they actually do not understand still that it's not punitive or disciplinary, it's rather educative. So we encourage lecturers to rather report students and get the educative process going than not. They are afraid of administration and reports, but we found it takes about 22 seconds to report. They rather give 0. I think that's the thing a lot of universities, other universities do. On their own, they just give 0 for assignment. I think there's, although we have this process in place, and that remains unfair towards students. Or they ignore the possible use of AI just to get less work or carry on with their other work. And that makes the situation worse if there's nothing in place. It creates the opposite culture of cheating and getting away with it. Positively, we saw that some modules are identified now that where AI is taking place more. If you have this data, it helps immediately to see, yes, in that module, in that faculty, and then our Center for Teaching and Learning can intervene and try to create different types of assessments. Positively, we found that very few students transgress a second time. You see there the number for the last year on this system, we had about 3,500 students. That's from 50,000 on the system. reported, and only 64 were in the end referred to our judicial services. So the students realize now there's a system in place, they get educated, they do not transgress again, and we create a system of academic integrity or culture. Positively, our judicial services are not overloaded, so they can focus with more time on more serious cases, and they can finalize the marks within time with their outcomes. And then lastly, we saw that our courses, we keep it up to date. And I think it's really excellent courses. It's developed interdisciplinary, and we try to update it with the latest AI things. So that's easy to update and make sure we try to be educative. With, of course, as I started, try to approach AI the whole time with the attitude of embracing it and exploring the possibilities of it. The last slide I just want to show, if I had more time, I can also show you more statistics. I'm not going to show it now. It's easy to demonstrate how the system works. I've published on some of these findings already. We are working now to package this with SIS Global. And then I think in future, we definitely need to look more on AI, teaching, learning, assessment, curriculum design. I think that would be the big challenge for universities all over. Thank you, Chair. I'll stop there. Yes, I think it was 10 minutes. I see you speaking, Chair, but you're still muted. So I'll switch off my camera. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very enlightening presentation. There will still be a time to engage with you. I'll go straight to our next speaker this afternoon, Nicky. If you can come in, Dr. Tjano. We can't
Thank you so much, Prof. Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen perfectly.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Prof. Verhoef did excellent work. And I must indicate, him and I were in previous discussions. We even went to learn from NWU in terms of how they were managing issues of academic integrity, because I think colleagues can agree that since the transition of online assessments, we have seen more and more issues around academic dishonesty increasing. And I think all of us were confronted with more or less the same problem. And we wanted to learn from one another to say, how are you managing it? And I think in our case, the challenge is more the issue of scalability, the large student numbers that we are having at UNISA. But suffice to say, I've decided to title my talk around the power of LLMs in terms of revolutionizing the education landscape, but also on the same time juxtapose that with whether they are entrenching academic dishonesty. And one is looking in terms of, are we having ethical fine line that we can talk of? And particularly so, and I think some of colleagues can attest that recently you will have seen this particular headlines on UNISA, basically about 11 days ago, where it was indicated that UNISA is robbed by AI, ChatGPT, and cheating scandal. And when we said, we talk as colleagues to say there's this article that is doing rounds. A day before, in fact, we were in a meeting because, as you know, media are also trying to give us right of reply. And given protocols and governance structures in the university, we couldn't just immediately respond without consulting further. But as you know, in the media space, time is of essence. But we then reflected and say, if we are having a news headline like this, shouldn't we be happy that the systems that we are putting in place are now catching those students that are engaging in academic dishonesty? So we looked at this to say, perhaps there is positive message in that article, instead of us being defensive and trying to spin, as those that are in media space, they will talk of spin doctoring and so forth. And we then responded with a article also say it is misleading, because on one element, we wanted to address the issue of the tone that is in the newspaper, but also some of the facts that were sort of one-sided. And particularly, we also put forward that maybe let's appreciate the measures that we are putting in place as a higher education institution to then deal with what would have been a scandal, because it wasn't a scandal. We do know that students are engaging this, especially because there are conduct or dishonesty. And we then indicated, for those that will have time, can even go and just check in terms of the facts that we put forward. But in more than anything, we were more on what are measures that can be put in place, that can even be strengthened to ensure that students do not engage on this. And one has to also admit that there is no one-size-fits-all, and I think you will see later in the slides. And when I was preparing for this particular talk, because we do many talks around this subject in our space, and for others who have heard that recently there were a number of articles that were retracted. But as you can see, about 10,000 research papers were retracted in 2023, and the figure has gone up if you check the latest figures. And one journalist in the name of Richard also indicated that this is shocking, but one is then thinking, what are we doing, to the discipline, and in terms of promoting the academic integrity, the ethical standards, and so forth. And if you read further, it also give breakdown in terms of the countries with the highest number of retraction, and it is no surprise because those countries are also leading in terms of adoption of these tools. But I think what was worrying was that this is a tip of an iceberg, which means more shocking stories could be revealed. And when I was talking with a colleague, in fact, earlier this morning, he even indicated to say a spoon that can be found in the hands of the wrong person can be deadly. So which means these tools, which are mostly accessible, they are free. If we did not invest more in educating, training, capacity development, it can be deadly, because some of these students or some of these colleagues that are committing these misconducts, some they do it unaware, some they are not even aware of the repercussions that can even come out of that. And we're even looking with students themselves to say, if they continue to engage in these academic misconducts, they are killing their own degrees, the value of the degrees that they are going to get after graduation. And it's all in the name of educating them. But then, if you can check in terms of how the LLMs have been transformational in nature, it started late towards around 1950s, and there are different waves as they describe this particular evolution. There was a first wave that was more characterized by rule-based, coming up with proper rules, procedures, and codes or prompts that could basically manage the field of AI, deep learning, machine learning, and so forth. And then there was a wave in terms of where big data and machine learning was getting traction, and we are now witnessing the third wave, which is where most of us are now. And this is where we're witnessing the power of generative AI tools. If you can think of the ChatGPTs of this world, the DALs of this world, the POEs of this world, the Geminis of this world. And we were fascinated, in 2022 when ChatGPT was released, and we're amazed in terms of what it could do, especially in terms of the conversational nature. Although the other strand of research is also looking at ability of these bots to demonstrate emotions, and if you read more in terms of human computer interaction, they're advancing for AI bots or machines that can have human element in them. Otherwise, it goes back to that saying, a spoon in the wrong hands can be deadly, because if they are not able to show those emotions, they can equally be dangerous. But beside this development, beside this power, we have then witnessed that there are some ethical dilemmas that we are confronted with. And some of the examples of the power of these LLMs or AI bots or chat GPTs of this world is all about efficiency in terms of how we are now able to conceptualize research projects, problem statement, conducting literature review, analysis, and so forth. And in terms of accessibility, they have broadened access and they have increased in terms of educational support. We're even in our case thinking how we can bring the support to even lecturers in terms of grading, and we procure grading tools just to lay off amount of administrative work and tedious work from lecturers. But also if you think of how they have transformed the learning experiences, and they are now even personalizing that. This summer, for example, in terms of collaboration, they have increased abilities for interdisciplinary or intradisciplinary collaboration, and that's the power. But this power is not coming with only benefits that we have seen, but when we have seen the acts of plagiarism that have increased, and a case in point is those articles that I've shared with you in the beginning, and they are able to generate content without proper attribution. And there is another strand of machine learning that are supervised, and they are behaving much way better compared to unsupervised machine learning. And with unsupervised, because they are trained to generate response irrespective of the outcome, whether it will be received with good intentions or otherwise. But we have seen, and as Prof Verhoef was indicating earlier, for them as an NWU to embark on that big exercise of coming with academic integrity practices and measures that they've put in place was definitely because they were witnessing a high rate of plagiarism among their students. But we have also seen that these tools can also perpetuate bias. It can be ethnic bias, cultural bias, language bias, cognitive bias. There are different types of bias, and simply because of how they are trained. And one of the colleagues, I think 2 weeks ago, was interviewing me in terms of their magazine that they want to produce within their space. And they wanted to understand, how can we address this? And I indicated to say, for us in the Southern Hemisphere, we then need to be part of the game. Part of the game, meaning that we also need to produce our own LLMs or AI bots and so forth, so that we are able to train them in our language. And you will have read, for those that are AI enthusiasts like myself, that for those that are speaking English in their second language, it tend to be stereotypical in a way and discriminate against. And it's not intentional. Of course, when the engineers were developing those systems, they were not intentionally saying we want to discriminate against this group or against these people in this part of the world. But unfortunately, we have seen those discrimination or biases being perpetuated. And this is where measures need to be in place, especially, as I said, ethical fine line. Much as we don't want to control or be too rigid against productivity, because if you can think of prompt engineering become one of the highly sought skills in nowadays, you don't want to at the same time dampen down that particular productivity. But at the same time, you also need some element of control just to manage what could go wrong, if you can think of Murphy's Law and so forth. The misinformation we have seen in the social media, how it can think. And I think for those that will have engaged with the literature again on this particular subject, we learn about how they are hallucinating. Hallucinating in the sense that this is how they are trained to fetch information. And in some cases, then they make up information that can be useful in a way, or be acceptable or be receptive to the prompter. But with that, this is where extra validation, cross-validation becomes important. But how do you then balance? On one hand, you have got transformative power of these tools. On one hand, you are confronted with unethical behaviors that we have seen increasing. And I think you will have heard about a Harvard president that had to step down because there were sort of cloud around their head. And how do you then continue with a principle of integrity if such happen? So my thinking is that there is no one size fits all when we come to this, but we need calabash, as I usually call it, of measures that together work towards a common goal of managing or leveling the playing field. Leveling playing field in the sense that we still want to promote digital literacy, especially as World Economic Forum indicate that digital literacy is one of those skills that we need to survive or to be competitive in this era. So how do we then promote transparency and creativity through governance processes? And must I say, those governance processes or measures or structures that we put in place should not be punitive, as also you will have heard from the previous speaker, to say the whole idea is then to indicate the possible dangers and what should be done. So we then need to make sure that there are policies and guidelines, frameworks in place, and most of the universities have produced guidelines and policies around usage of LLMs or AI chatbot. We should also be promoting principles of accountability. And this is through various systems that we can deploy to detect and address misuse of LLMs. And this is what we have actually done with our introduction of exam committee, student disciplinary committee, deployment of invigilator apps, and so forth. And I must say, and I must emphasize that that is not enough if you then want to be a big brother and have Hawk's kind of view just to check if there is one that is going wrong. I mean, doing some wrong things. The other part is more, which I strongly believe in, both students, staff, researchers, the continuous training and development of staffs and students, and especially around ethical implications and responsible use. So, and this is not necessarily to say we don't want the usage, but we say use it as you are using it, use it responsibly. And I can give an example of SAP. While they're advertising their product, they will also have a message that please drink and enjoy responsibly. And one could even think of that as contradictory, but it's one way of saying, much as you're enjoying the usage, also be responsible. And I think the same notion is the one that we are bringing into this space, because a lot of students, or even researchers, they will be under pressure. If you think of pressure of academic industry, where we need to put large number of outputs, Prof. Majozi, how am I going to catch 300 articles, or in my name?
Are we drawing to a close?
Pardon?
Are we drawing to a close? I'm looking at
yes,
time.
Yes. This is the second last slide.
Okay, great.
So what we are doing at UNISA, we have worked on position statement that also indicate what is the position of university as far as the use of AI is concerned. We are working on AI policy and guidelines, and I must admit it took us long, given the stature of our university and the size, especially the approval procedures. We have revised the policy on academic integrity. We also have instituted academic integrity committees in faculties, what we call at UNISA as colleges, and we also have exam committee that is looking at some of these behaviors and what lecturers are reporting to us. And this is where we're able to catch those students that will have committed. So in conclusion, as I'm in my parting shot, is that while we are appreciating the potential that we have in terms of these tools, but we also need to address ethical concerns that are relating to academic dishonesty, bias, and so forth. But also, we also need to make sure that and events like this is a call to action, as I call it, that having ongoing dialogue around this subject will also improve our ethical standards in the space that we find. Thank you so much, Prof. And sorry, I have to go on by a minute. This is a subject that I'm so passionate about. Thank you so much.
I can tell, Dr. Tjano. Very thought-provoking, and I'm sure we have inspired a number of questions which will come your way at the right time. Thank you for this presentation and setting the tone on the application of LLMs, particularly around regulations and policy. So I would go straight now to Prof. Morris. Prof. Morris, over to you. You have your floor.
Thanks very much, Prof. Majozi, and thanks very much for this opportunity and this invitation. So yes, you can move to the next slide, Maputi.
Maputi, put on presentation mode, Maputi.
Let me start again.
Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. And thanks very much for this interesting topic. So, I mean, we've heard from the other two speakers, you know, about some of the what one would consider unfair advantages of using AI. And we've heard some of those: academic integrity, the loss of critical thinking skills, and of course the accuracy and the quality of AI. But I'm going to focus much more on the research side of using AI, which really is teaching us a lot because it's just got such huge power. So it increases our efficiency and our productivity. It allows us to innovate more. We can accelerate research and increase collaboration. But of course, and as the other two speakers have underlined, you know, the use of LLMs really does need to be underpinned by strong educational policies and ensuring academic integrity and ethical use. But also we need to train our students, and our staff, of course, and our academic staff, in how to use these skills and how to use these tools. Next slide, please. So Nature did a survey and published it late last year on what researchers think about the use of AI. They did write, I think, about 40,000 researchers. They got 1,600 responses, and half of them actually do actively use AI and actually work on AI. And then a significant portion use AI in their research, and some don't use. I think about a third of them don't use AI at all. So it's important just to remember who's answering this survey. But it was very interesting that that actually most researchers are using AI, and it's hard to see the slide here, but really for fun uses, for creative uses. That was the most usage. But of course, increasingly people are using it, you know, to write code, to help write research papers, and some of these, you know, are quite concerning. People are using them to help review manuscripts, for instance, which I know is a very controversial topic. And from the survey, they also, you know, listed, and on the next slide, the advantages and the benefits of using LLMs and the difficulties. And so there's no doubt, you know, that these tools speed up and automate a lot of processes. And also, you know, I think people whose first language is not English. It helps with you know, editing and writing and translation. It allows people to summarize vast amounts of data, and particularly for literature reviews, which is just almost impossible to get through the vast volume of data. And people increasingly are using it to help to write the manuscripts, obviously improve the readability of their manuscripts. And then you'll see at the bottom, even using it to generate new hypotheses. And then, as I mentioned before, helping to peer review manuscripts, which of course does raise some eyebrows, not only around the ethics of it, but also around the privacy laws of putting manuscripts onto public servers. And then, you know, of course, the problems, and I won't go through too many of these because the previous speakers have done that, you know, misinformation, plagiarism, and biases, and then also about the energy and the carbon footprint of using all these LLMs. That also came up as you know, a problem in the survey. But having said that, on the next slide, all researchers do recognize that that it has uses, and its uses are increasing. So you'll see on the top, this is how useful you think AI tools are in your field, and on the bottom, how useful will it be in the next decade? And you can see that the colors are increasing because people do recognize that these tools are going to become increasingly useful, even those people who don't use AI currently in research. So there's no doubt these, you know, these tools are here. They're going to be used, and it's about how we, you know, how we use them and how we integrate them into our research and make sure they're used responsibly. So on the next slide, really is, I thought, a fascinating paper about the use of AI tools and to go through the whole research process. So starting from the idea all the way to writing the paper. And it was, so they tasked GPT-4 to write an original pharmaceutics manuscript on a topic that is novel. And this, it was able to conceive a research hypothesis, define an experimental protocol, produce photorealistic images of 3D printed tablets, pharmaceutical tablets, drugs basically, generate believable analytical data from a range of instruments, and write a convincing publication-ready manuscript with evidence of critical interpretation. And remarkably, this took GPT-4 less than 1 hour. Now, I don't know if that makes me happy or makes me very nervous and scared, but it is quite a remarkable thing. Of course, we have no idea whether this drug is of any use. It has to obviously be validated and tested. But nevertheless, this ability to generate, new ideas and take our research in new directions, I think is quite exciting. I thought one little interesting thing is one area in which the model failed was its referencing to the literature. So the most simple task, actually, it seems to have failed on. But anyway, just to give you an idea of the power of some of these models. And this was actually further explored on the next slide, a much more comprehensive study done by Microsoft and at Cornell and Microsoft Azure Quantum, published last year, really looking at the scientific discovery process in all of these different areas. And it spans drug discovery, biology, chemistry, material science, and mathematics. And it really interrogated, and I'm not going to go through all of these things, but some very, very complex experimental procedures. And just to give you an idea of all of the criteria that they evaluated, if you go on to the next slide, I've just listed them here to just give you a sense of the types of analyses that they did, including modeling, predictions, experimental design, and even new hypothesis generation. And there's the reference there if you want to go and read it, because their conclusion from this, and this is the high level conclusion on the next slide, is that LLMs can accelerate the scientific discovery and drive innovation, and this is in multiple fields. So there's no doubt that the data that they were getting was very useful and led to new discoveries. But of course, the word of caution, and this applies not just to this study, but to the use of LLMs in any endeavor, obviously is interpreted, maintains a healthy skepticism. So continue to use your human brain. But I think that the very important part of use of these tools is that you should continue to refine them. And that's obviously the prompting. So they're iterative and they get better, all the time. And then another very, very important aspect actually is combining it with domain-specific tools. That are many already in use for scientific discovery, such as AlphaFold, which is a structure modeling software, protein folding software that can achieve much more reliable results. So if you match it with with some of these high-end tools, these models can become even more reliable. So this just highlights, the drug discovery process and how AI and machine learning can help the drug discovery process. It identifies new targets. It can mine huge databases and find new targets for diseases that we've never had drugs for before. It can develop completely new compounds. You just tell it, what the properties are, and it'll develop new compounds. The virtual screening will greatly speed up the screening process and prioritize drugs for testing. Of course, the structure-based, it can predict how structures are going to react, how soluble they'll be, whether they can cross the blood-brain barrier, what their half-life will be. And then, of course, you can even, find other uses for existing drugs. That's also a very sort of hot area in drug discovery. So, and then, you'll have seen this has been reported in multiple publications. On the next slide, this is revolutionizing drug discovery, with hundreds of new compounds being tested and tried. As of yet, there hasn't been an AI drug that's been FDA approved but there are many in clinical trials, and some existing drugs have certainly been improved through the use of AI tools. But there's no doubt there's going to be a revolution in drug discovery as a result of AI. Of course, the thing that it can't really speed up is the actual testing. That still has to go through the rigorous clinical trial process, but certainly the discovery phase, is greatly speeded up. On the next slide, I just want to tell you about this very interesting tool called SciMuse, or Scientific Muse. And it basically just trawls through, I'm not going to go through all the details, but basically it just trawls through, millions of publications and finds links between completely unrelated data sets and forms these knowledge trees. And it can actually then come up with new research hypotheses. So you could even do it for individual researchers, take a researcher's publications and another researcher and find areas to collaborate on. So it comes up with completely new ideas, often cross-disciplinary ideas and completely unexpected findings. So this is a new tool that I think will be very useful for researchers. Of course, again, they have to be tested. And so what they did do is that they generated a whole lot of ideas or research ideas and ran them past a large expert panel. And about 25% the panel thought were worth exploring further. So just to give you a sense that it is actually generating new, interesting ideas. The next slide, in my last few minutes, I'll just touch, and I'll probably skim over this because a lot of it has been covered. This is actually, and I want to thank the library at Wits for organizing this webinar on the use of AI in scientific writing and scholarly publishing. And I've used 2 of the slides from that talk. On the next slide, I think, we've talked about this and before, is what are the concerns about using AI in scientific writing and publishing? Of course, the ethical concerns and biases, homogenization of content, I think, is another thing, of course, because, these LLMs just need data all the time, or else they just start to churn out the same stuff. But I think just on the next slide, to highlight more importantly, what I see as the benefits. Obviously, the time saving, you can improve language and text, identify novel topics. And I think another very interesting one, even things like recommending reviewers or recommending which journal to publish in. So there are lots of, I think, very interesting uses of LLMs in scholarly publishing as well. Of course, all the publishers are treating AI very differently. There's no sort of standard approach to how they're handling them. Some are welcoming the use, some are prohibiting the use. So I think this is an interesting space to see how the publishing world deals with AI. I think I've got 1 or 2 more slides. So I think just very importantly, the International Science Council have put together this, it's the start of a dialogue about how we're going to prepare our national research systems for incorporating AI, because there's no doubt this is revolutionizing our world, and how are we going to, integrate it? Because it's changing the way we do research, but also how we write research and how we even think about research. It could also change how we fund research. So people who don't use AI may be at a disadvantage, or even review panels, because AI generated research is going to be much more cross-disciplinary. And are we going to be able to find people to review this kind of research? How will it change the type of work we produce? How will our careers change? We're going to all have to become AI experts. And of course, a very important thing is about the infrastructure, because a lot of the powerful cloud computing is in the private, is not in the public domain. How do we access a lot of, some of the infrastructure? And of course, the whole legal framework as well. And how will it affect North-South collaborations? These are all very important, critical questions. So I think it's the start of a dialogue that we should certainly, as South Africa, take part in. And then this is just a very interesting. It was actually a dialogue between 2 academics who have diametrically opposed views about AI. One is an optimist, and the other was a skeptic. And it was just a very interesting discussion about, you know, how some people see this as just, and almost being uncritically using, you know, AI to advance things, whereas, you know, skeptics are seeing it as really undermining the academic process and critical thinking. But of course, what we really need to do is harmonize these views, and we need to, you know, make sure that we integrate AI into our research and have, you know, clear guidelines, but to keep the dialogue going. And that's, of course, with ethicists, with policymakers, with academics, and with students, because it is a fast-changing world, and we're going to have to keep up with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Morris. Very compelling indeed, your arguments. But you've triggered a few questions that I'm going to share with you at some point. I'm so looking forward to your responses. I think without any further waste of time, perhaps let's go straight to Prof. Walwyn. Dave, over to you, also with your 10-odd minutes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Professor Majozi. And just to let you know, the other speakers have taken up most of my time. So I think I'm much more interested in the audience conversation, quite honestly. But I'm also very grateful to Professor Lynn Morris, who covered a lot of the material that I was, certainly the intent of the material that I was hoping to present. I mean, the title of this talk is Large Language Models, and it's smart work or academic doping. And I'm very much on the side of the smart work side, and I'm going to explain the reasons for that in a minute. But yes, Maputi, if you can just start my slides, that'll be great. And then I'll give the introduction. You can go to the next slide in a minute. So that I have to start by acknowledging, first of all, that I am yeah, there we go. I'm talking to you from Riebeek West, and that is the view out of my window yesterday. It's not the view this morning, which is cloudy and not very pleasant and freezing cold. So that is South Africa, believe it or not. So I'm going to talk about neural net architecture in a minute. So just hold that slide for me. But let me just briefly say that I am a self-proclaimed early adopter, meaning that I enjoy experimenting with new technologies and trying to bring them into the work that I do. And that led me in the 1990s to have some exposure and to use artificial neural nets in a rather complex problem where the ANN was very successful. So the problem itself was the optimization of a fermentation system. So this is a biological system, and anyone who works with anything biological will know that it's never simple, that these are always complex systems. They're very difficult to predict, and they're exceedingly difficult to change or optimize. And so we used in a development team, we used at that time ANNs as a way of optimizing this biological system, and it was very successful. And I have to tell you that at the time, ANNs were regarded with suspicion and branded as mindless black boxes, which would correctly fit any data set, meaning they would map the variable to the outcomes, but you could never use them for interpolation or prediction. And so I discovered that this was an incorrect perception, that it was ill-founded, and the ANN that I used was very successful in optimizing that system in a non-deterministic way. So I'm going to introduce to you the terms deterministic and empirical at this point. I think that, on the whole, when we look at the comments about large language models, they're always about the dreadful implications of large language models for all sorts of fields in which we operate and how they can mislead us and hallucinatory, etc. But there's very little discussion, I think, real discussion about how they work. And I think that's extremely problematic. And it's problematic because it leads to this sense of distrust and alienation that we experience as a consequence of the adoption of the new technology. So there are three reasons I think that large language models, but ANNs more generally, have faced a lot of uphill. And the first reason is this issue about understanding, that we really don't understand how they work. And we have this view that they are non-deterministic. So that's the second reason, that they are not based on cause and effect relationships in a way that we can test. They use an empirical approach in which associations are determined on the basis of probability functions, not of linear equations in the form of algebra. We therefore don't have a deterministic understanding of the logic that's inherent within the artificial neural net or the large language model. And then the final one is the issue about misleading results. So number one, I said, was the distrust of new technology, that especially that one we don't understand. Number two was that it's empirical and not deterministic. And the third one is this question about that it can lead to hallucinatory and sometimes dangerous results. And we know that in the case of machine learning, for instance, that there have been severe accidents as a consequence of an over-reliance on a machine learned model. So very briefly then, how do neural nets work? And I'm not an expert in this, but when I used neural nets in the 1990s, this is the kind of architecture that they followed. So on the left-hand side, you have an input layer where you input all your variables. And on the right-hand side, you have the outputs. In this case, it's represented by Y. And between that, you have all these hidden layers in which the relationships between the nodes in the hidden layers are mediated by these weighting factors. So if you go to the next slide, this is just an example of a multi-layer feed-forward network to give you an idea of what the network might look like. And you can see that there are the multiple layers and there are multiple nodes. So each layer might have maybe 100 or 100,000 or 1 million nodes, and each node is connected to the other in the following layer, unless it's in a feedback mode or recursive mode, in which case there are recursive loops. So if I just go to my example very, very briefly, go to the next slide. Thank you so much. This is an example of a single layer feed-forward network in which there's an algebraic relationship between the inputs and the outputs. So the input are X, and these are values 1 to 50, and the outputs are Y, and these are the values 2 to 100. And you can see that the weighting factor between those two layers is 2. So in algebraic terms, it would be Y is equal to 2 times X. Now, in the artificial neural nets that we used in the 1990s, you generally followed a 3-step process. The first was that you had a set of data. So this would be the learning data. And in this case, it would be the numbers 1 to 50 and the numbers 2 to 100. Actually, let's make it a bit more simple. It would be the numbers 1 to 30 and then the numbers 2 to 60. And then you would have a test set. So the test set would be the numbers 31 to 50 and the numbers 62 to 100. And you would test whether you got any good correlation between your inputs and outputs. And then finally, you would have a prediction set. And so the prediction set would then be any numbers between 1 and 50, and you would then predict what the value would be of the Y. And that might be, hopefully, if you've done your learning and your testing correctly, it would be a weighting factor of 2, and that would give you then, let's say that you wanted to model what would happen if my X value was 25.5, and then hopefully it would give you the answer 51. So it wouldn't just be restricted to integer values. So if you go to my next slide, this is really just a very simple version of what a large language model is doing, but it has some very, very fundamental differences. So in the large language models, and in case of English, you have approximately 170,000 English words, which have almost an infinite, 170,000 factorial ways of creating these correlations between the different words. And the way that language models work, of course, is that they do correlations one word at a time. So if you have the word fantastic, what's the most likely association with the word fantastic in the context that we are listening? And the most likely association would be fantastic lecture, or maybe you don't agree with that, but it would be something along, it's a fantastic afternoon, or there would be all sorts of associations with the word fantastic, and then the model would, on a probability basis, work out which would be the most likely sequel to the adjective fantastic given the context. So the large language model then is a transformer model, which learns context, and it, as a result, it can set up tracking relationships in sequential data. And I'm just reading to you straight from the slide because that seems to me the best way of expressing this. All right, so now you can stop the presentation. Thank you so much. I'm basically done. But I wanted to finish just with a few things, much in the same way as Professor Morris did, about where do I think the large language models have got the best application now that we understand how they work. And the one is certainly AI, the minutes of meetings. So I noticed in the chat that it said that AI assistants already outperformed all of the presenters. And I can tell you that I can't remember the name of the program that does minutes of meetings, but I am constantly blown over by the quality of the meeting minutes and the transcripts, the quality of the summary of transcripts that AI can produce. Secondly, improving written English. For those of you lecturers who have struggled for years and years and years to make sense of what students are trying to communicate to you, now that we have ChatGPT and ChatGPT can do the translation, I just think it's fantastic. And I don't have a problem with that issue. Secondly, the optimization of chemical recipes. Professor Morris talked a bit about this. And I can tell you that having worked for 4 or 5 years in a chemistry laboratory where it was always that expression of, in my laboratory, there's, I can't remember the exact quotation, but I know that it ends on the sentence that in my laboratory, nothing works. And that was how I experienced my PhD. In my laboratory, nothing works. And a probability-based large language model is very, very good at solving the problem of how to optimize a chemistry recipe. And if you don't believe me, try it on food recipes. Just ask ChatGPT to give you the best recipe for beef Wellington or whatever it is that you love, and you'll be totally amazed. Summarizing large text, giving an initial summary of a field with which you are unfamiliar, increasing the diversity and richness of language through an ability to access multiple lexicons. I think ChatGPT is amazing at that. And one that I came across recently was learning the language of animals. So whether you're a bird, a fish, a frog, or a dolphin, ChatGPT has got your number and can really begin to understand how you are communicating with your fellow species. And so finally then, Professor Majozi, I know you're impatient to get on with the discussion, but just very, very quickly, Yuval Harari. Yuval Harari says that large language models are the end of humanity. And you can see, obviously, that I don't agree with that. And I'm going to throw that question open to the audience. Those of you who agree with Yuval Harari, explain us why you think that would be the case. And those who disagree, I'm interested in your argument. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that, Dave, for that very, very, very nice treatise on how the artificial neural networks inform the large language models. No, that's fine. I'm not too worried about time. I'm aware that we've eaten into a bit of time here, but I think the presentations were really, really compelling and really engrossing. So it was difficult to simply stop because the message would be distorted. But I think the foundation has been laid for us to have a very good discussion. And it's very clear if one looks at the 4 presentations that were presented that there is a nice confluence across all the presentations, particularly the first 2 talk to each other in a very, very, very harmonious fashion, and as well as the last 2 as well by Dave and Lynn. I'll start off maybe with the first 2, the one by Anne and Nicky. I just want to know, I mean, strictly speaking, all of us are grappling with how do we manage ethical standards or sustain ethical standards in an academic setting under the circumstances that we find ourselves in with AI in particular. And you've come up with some suggestions, both of you. I just want to know the practical elements of it. What is the extent of administrative burden that comes with this? I just want to hear from both of you whether this is practical or not. Suggestions have been made in terms of how we could apply some of the techniques to detect where there has been ethical fraud or where there's been misconduct, but to what extent, to what practical extent does this apply? I just want to get your experiences. I'll start off with you, Annie.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's, I think, a good question. And I think it was also in the chat that somebody was concerned about that lecturers are already burned out, and now suddenly we have to deal with unethical use of AI by students as well. So I've answered there that we do need a system in place that support lecturers and students. If this is done only by lecturers to see where possible AI cheating has taken place, it becomes such a huge task with every assessment, with every possible assignment that students submit. We already have the possibility of plagiarism and other forms of cheating, and we don't want to police. We do want to celebrate and use the positive aspects of AI. So this is a energy-sucking exercise to just police and see where we can prohibit or stop the unethical use of AI. So we do need a system in place that supports lecturers, that supports students. It should be student-focused, and students should be educated. And I think that's it's an institutional thing. Since the first day at university, they should be orientated, educated about AI, the unethical, ethical use, clear guidelines. The same for lecturers. To ignore it, to just say, no, this is too much admin for me, that will just create a worse scenario. That will just undermine all the efforts we put in our subjects and the positive things that we also want to do and enjoy. So we do need a system and a process that supports us. I saw many, or say all universities, I think it's compulsory, have excellent academic integrity policies in place, but not clear and clear and simple processes to follow, to manage it. So that's first of all, processes needs to be in place, and then definitely a system that helps the lecturers. And as I said, we developed an automated one. So if you detect then some problems, you can report it within 20 seconds. Then the system works with us that it goes to a subject group committee. And we were afraid in the beginning it will take too much time of committees then. We don't want extra committee works. You know, people, they're allergic to it. They don't want to serve on another committee and use more time. But we found with our system that it's so obvious after the lecturer spotted it, after there's some motivation given, documents attached, and subject specialists look at it, they can quickly see. Now we agree, and it takes much less time then if there's an automated system in place, clear processes. Let me stop there, otherwise I'll take too much time.
Thank you very much, Anne. And then I just want to hear your view, Nicky, on that. Could you concur fully with Anne?
Yeah, no, we are on the same line. And I think maybe what I can add to avoid repeating what he said is also now to change our teaching practices or pedagogies, if you like. Because if in this era, if we still teach in such a way that students will be tempted and just get the answer as is without interrogating it, then we are also adding more fuel to fire, so to say. So a change in teaching approach is then needed. If I can even take it back to curriculum design, how are we designing curricula? Are we designing it in such a way that we are going to get the high order thinking skills if you think of digital blooms? Or is it a matter of pitching it for students just to pass the module? And I think just to add on what Anne has indicated is then to also look from teaching point of view, are we still teaching in the era that is suitable for these powers of AI? And if you think of researchers, and I saw one of the audience also asking to say, with all this said and done, what does it mean on promotion and standards thereof? And this is the area that we also need to look at. As I was giving an example to say, with the pressure that we find ourselves in, we are chasing outputs in terms of numbers to get promotion. But then if we are then going to use, and I think Prof. Walwyn indicated to say he's more on the smart side of it, But that smart side of it must also have some element of management to circumvent against misuse. So those for me are two areas that need attention.
Thank you very much for that. Thanks, Annie. Thanks, Nicky, for that. Then I just have a question. I think this one would apply to both Lynn and Dave. I mean, Dave, you gave a very nice explanation of how the LLMs work. And in the final analysis, it is a stochastic framework that involves synthesis, of your input and output. And that space tends to be really, really large. I just want to know, Lynn, is this now the time for us to do away with the word plagiarism in the true sense of the word plagiarism?
Oh, no, I think plagiarism is still a very real thing. No, I don't think, I mean, I guess that the truth is that, LLMs generate, it's not plagiarized text, it is actually new text. So I guess it's not plagiarism in the strict, sense of the word, but these and the others spoke about the tools that we can use to detect, this. But certainly, I don't think no, it does away with plagiarism.
So there's still room for the word plagiarism, in the true sense of the word plagiarism.
I guess in a traditional sense, yes.
Yeah, and then Dave, I just wanted to know. I think Lynn can also come in here. The one question that comes to mind when we talk about this novel drug innovation that comes with AI or underpinned by AI in particular. Who takes the credit if the drug works perfectly fine? And who takes the fall for the consequences? Should there be adverse consequences for using the drugs? Maybe let me start off with you, Dave, and then Lynn.
I mean, just first of all, on plagiarism. Plagiarism is theft, so it's plagiarism in classical terms is claiming work that someone else has done as your own. And I mean, we can never do away with that. That would be ridiculous. It would just be condoning criminality. But I don't have a problem with a student using AI to get some insight and then acknowledging that insight came from an AI. Why should we have a problem with that? In a way, I mean, we're a bunch of educators, and it's a bit like asking the publisher of Encyclopedia Britannica what they thought of Google when Google was launched. Because in some ways, large language models are going to undermine a lot of the work that we do as academics. And we're the last people in the world who should be commenting on how LLMs should be regulated, because we have a vested interest in no LLMs. So, I mean, I think we have to be very careful in this discussion and be completely honest in terms of what perspective we're adopting. But, I mean, the question that you asked
also, if I may come in there, Dave, plagiarism against professional misconduct. Sometimes we have to separate the two. We've always interpreted plagiarism as using someone's work without acknowledging that person. That is the basic essence of plagiarism. If you look at how the LLMs work, and you've articulated this very, very well, it is really taking information from elsewhere and then ultimately coming up with a new product. That new product cannot be attributed to any particular source because it's a number of sources that have come together, other than to say, for example, in the case of students, we emphasize that they must say this came from, say, ChatGPT or Cloud AI or any source thereof. They must acknowledge that. But that's not necessarily, not doing so does not necessarily mean plagiarism in the truest sense of plagiarism. It is academic misconduct because we have to, at all times, we have to declare where the knowledge came from. So in that sense, all of us are on the same page. But the legal definition of plagiarism doesn't apply here. That is my position. Yeah. So,
I mean, I think we can agree and disagree on exactly what the conventional plagiarism.
Yeah.
But if I can just finish
on the drugs, what's your view on the drugs?
So on the question of drugs. So, at some point, someone will have to have paid for the clinical testing of that drug. And I think in a way it's immaterial where the background insight came from. The question is, I think, much more important in the context of the patent and who owns the intellectual property, because there may be no human intervention whatsoever. And as a consequence, no human can be ascribed to have had the original insight and be the owner of the patent. But I mean, you know, AI doesn't bring drugs to the market. That would never happen. You still have to do a clinical trial. You still have to manufacture the drug. You still have to put it in a pill. You still have to market it on the shelves. You still have to get doctors to prescribe it. And then you are a responsible party. And so I don't think we would ever be able to blame large language models, for instance, for deaths as a consequence of the you know, taking a drug which never went through proper clinical trials. I think that's the wrong question. You know? It's much more at the level of the originator of the idea that we have to think maybe a little bit more carefully. But even so, I don't have a problem with AI owning a patent. I know
So
it's not a legal person.
Okay, I understand. AI owning a patent, Dave. That's very original, I must say. Lynn, on your side?
Well, you know, some people, you know, co-author with AI. So some people do, I guess, give it this sort of anthropomorphic qualities, but, you know, it's not a sentient being. And so we can't attribute IP to, you know, to LLMs. But, you know, drug companies are very upfront about the fact that they use AI to design new drugs. I mean, they actually say these are AI designed drugs. So, you know, and, you know, if you think about the process to do that, does require intellectual input from the human, because you've got to ask the right questions, you've got to follow the right leads. Because I think one of the challenges, you know, with having so much information at your disposal and having so many options, is how do you then decide which ones to pursue? And that's obviously where the human creativity and intellect still plays a role, because you know, it could lead you down, you know, all sorts of wild goose chases, and they end up being, you know, wasting a lot of time and money. So there's still that element of discernment that you know, that the human applies in taking a drug forward. And as Dave says, you know, that's only the discovery phase that AI can help with. It can't speed up manufacturing and clinical trials.
So basically, Lynn, what you're saying is the role for a human being is eternal.
Oh, well, I think we all agree on that. Yes, we're not going to be replaced.
All right, so okay, that's fine. I think at this point, to be honest, I just wanted to trigger the discussion among the panel members. I would really like the audience to get involved now, and it has been happening on the chat. I can see there's been some discussions taking place on the chat, but for now, I'd like to take questions directly from the audience. If at all possible, you'll have to help me here, Maputi, because I might not be able to see hands. I'll start off with hands first, if there's any hand from the audience. Any hand from the audience, Maputi? None?
I see a couple of hands up.
Yeah.
Is it? I can't see. Okay, yes. I see Nicholas. Nicholas, I'll start off with you.
Hi, everyone. I'll keep it really short. I think it's wonderful to hear these discussions. You know, sometimes one sits in one's garret, and it's so nice to hear this lively discussion and see all these exchanges also in the chat. Thank you very much to the speakers and to yourself, Thokozani. So very briefly, I do think that sentience is something that is on its way. If one simply, you know, I mean, we don't have to have a religious discussion about souls and so on, but just feelings is not unlikely. I mean, it's already got sort of eyes and ears, and you know, it's, you know, developing bodies all over the world and so on. And I think you know, also with the speed of the various updates, you know, things going by orders of magnitude, it's very clear that it's becoming very necessary to think about, you know, the alignment problem, that, you know, at some point it's going to be very overwhelming in many ways. So I think this EU regulation, I put a link there, that's been going on, is obviously very necessary. I mean, who's at fault when, you know, a driverless car runs someone over? who's at fault if that, for instance, if that patent turns out, or you know, the chemical, you know, turns out to now suddenly be bad for someone's health and so on. So one needs to take, one needs to have legal instruments to take non-human intelligences into, you know, into some kind of responsibility. And that's really interesting. So even if we don't believe that there's sentience or an agency that we want to reserve as, you know, to humans, we need to sort of act as if. Otherwise, it's totally out of control. And I think that's kind of philosophically quite an interesting position we've created for ourselves.
No, thanks for that very philosophical intervention, Nicholas. So we are saying that with time, there could be convergence between humans as we know them and humans as a derivation of AI. Is that what it is?
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, then I think yours was more like a comment, really just framing everything that we've been discussing rather than a question. But let me just ask if there's anyone from the panelists who want to respond to Nicholas. Came across as just a comment, and a very, very apt one, by the way, Nicholas. Okay, so if I can go to then Martha, you're the second, come in.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, Martha, I can hear you perfectly.
Thank you very much. I am taking this down to a much more practical level from the idea of the sentient mind of AI. I am an editor of an academic journal. I posted a question. I'm very curious about how AI detection is possible without compromising the, shall we say, ownership of the material being checked on the AI detection material or platform. So I asked the question, you know, perhaps you have AI detection systems within your institutions and they are contained, and maybe with student papers, it is not such an important element of the whole process. But if you are managing an academic journal, a paper comes in, it is to go out for peer review, but you suspect that part of it or most of it was AI generated. How do you detect it besides looking very carefully at the language, becoming very familiar with the way AI, you know, ChatGPT writes? This is what I've had to begin to do. I work in the world of international affairs, the humanities, not science. And so I am, I'm very curious to know, because we've been warned off it by our publisher. We've been asked not to upload submitted articles through AI detection apps. So can I get some sort of guidance on how you are detecting AI?
Thank you very much, Martha, for that. Lynn, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer that, but I guess maybe just to comment, you know, they are detection tools, and there was a report quite recently, I think it was The Economist, to say something like 10% of scientific papers currently are using AI. So it's already widely used. Now, it might be that some journals are quite, you know, happy for it to be used. And others are not, and others have been quite clear about not using it. So the detection, you know, and I know there've been some reports that you know, use of particular words, because AI tends to use particular words, is one mechanism that people use to you know, to spot it. But you know, I think in terms of publishing, I think there's no doubt AI will be used for literature reviews and things like that, and maybe writing the methods. But you know, the actual scientific results, I mean, the whole point of publishing is that it's new knowledge. It undergoes a peer review, and so you know, I think if we start seeing, like we did that example that I gave of papers that are completely fictitious, you know, then that's really problematic. And I don't know how you do detect that, other than, you know, around issues of academic integrity and continuing to highlight that. But I'm sure Arne will have, and Nicholas will have a lot more to say.
Anne, I'll go to you now. Maybe you might have more insights on this, particularly along the lines of what you guys have been doing at Northwestern University with that software of yours.
No, thank you, Chair. I agree with Lynn, but I do want to add most journals, and I think the audience will know it. I will ask, if you submit an article, if you used AI, and they will say AI is not, so immediately you need that backing from your journal in their policy and guidelines also for the authors. And I think most will know that if you review articles, nowadays they also ask that you might not use AI to review the, the articles. So, and that should also be clear, because it seems to me reviewers of articles also just put it on AI and say, write a review. So and that undermines the whole integrity process for new publication or new knowledge. And I think, in my view, we should be, again, use different AI detection tools. If I'm an editor, I would use that to make sure if there's a huge AI similarity index, that needs to be interpreted. And you have a board on your editorial board that you can consult. To take all the responsibility on the shoulders of an editor would be too much. And of course, you don't want to publish an article that has been written by AI. The tools are not sufficient alone. I've said that. So I think that is applicable on the graduate level, postgraduate level, and especially then on the research level, where experts should decide if this is new knowledge, significant knowledge. And I guess we get better reviewers, I think, for better journals in the rule. I'm generalizing now, but I think in the long term, it will have an effect on the sustainability of journals that are not using good reviewers, because more and more AI written articles will just go through because the reviewers won't pick it up, or the editors will not care or not pick it up. So there's not a clear answer, but that's more or less, I think, along the lines I would handle it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Anne, for that. I think in the interest of time, and I can see there are many hands, I'll proceed, and thanks for those responses there. Olufemi, let me come to you. What's your question or your intervention?
Hello, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you for this discussion. It's been an area that I'm sure most people have been trying to, a difficult terrain we've been trying to navigate. We've been doing that for quite some time in my department. But there are some problems I have. For instance, much as we want to identify what students have done with AI and see how to make them to I don't know if I want to say dissuade them from using it. I don't know if that's the proper word to use, because there are some issues that I don't know how to handle. How do you police a policy for which you have no tool to detect? We can say, well, there are software to detect this, to detect AIs, but what happens is, number one, when you hear that this is the level of uncertainty in the output, can I commit to such? I think about some things. Number one, most students that will probably use it and will probably insist. If a student says, no, I didn't use it, or I just used it to paraphrase, I ask myself, do I say, stop using it at all? Or if a student that is even more, because sometimes the laws you make so that all students should comply is the criminally minded ones that will actually evade it, and you will not be able to do anything. We end up punishing the more forthright ones that will come out, tell you, I actually did, than the ones that will probably say flat out that I didn't use it, even if they use it, and you cannot do anything. Because you can't enforce it, you can't take them to court. If you even, in fact, if the students know that they were cheated because of such things or punished and go to court, there's a high chance that you as a university will probably be the guilty one if you cannot prove it. So I have problem with many of those things that I tell myself, how do we actually handle this? Than making policies that sometimes I sit back and tell myself, even these policies we make, can we implement them? We put them on paper, but we probably can't really implement them. should we not be thinking of better ways of structuring what we do? For instance, if we say that, I'm saying, should our approach be on detection, or saying, can we rather think of how else to probably structure what we do that downgrades the things that AI can do? Maybe that's what we need to do, because even detecting them, you can't do anything because the checks that we have are not so reliable. It is like a case, I don't know if it was Ronald Reagan that said it to the Americans when globalization started in the 1980s. He said, this is like a wave of the sea. You have a choice. Do you want to stand in the way of the wave and prevent it, or find a way to ride the crest? Because whether you like it or not, the wave will come, and it will either sweep you away or you find out to use it. So I'm at a point where I am not even sure what to do, because I have picked students that have AI issues in some of, especially when it comes to projects and such things. You sit them down. Some of them will just open up and say, I did. I only use for plagiarism. I say, how can I only use for paraphrasing? How can you paraphrase and have this percentage? But there are some students that will say flat out, I didn't use it. Can't I write like that? So, but you don't even know what to do when a student says that. Can I prosecute you based on that? And that is where the problem is, that even if you have the ones that are more difficult and we maybe refuse it to your face, what can you do? Because the student can go to court and say that actually the software you used to detect it is not reliable, and you will lose. Those are things that I think I want us to engage in.
I think you've made your point. It's very, very, very clear. You've put it very, very, very well. But it's clear that there is no certainty around that. And I think Anne summed it up very nicely, that there would have to be an alliance between the tools that you use and expert knowledge. So none of these can do this alone. The tools on their own would never be able to do that. And if I'm not mistaken, in the presentation, it was made clear that you can't even dismiss the student if there's suspicion that they used a ChatGPT or any of the tools. But you are 100% right. You are spot on. I'm looking at time. What I'm going to do now, and Olufem, thanks for that. By the way, you posed the question, and I think you alluded to the answer as well. But because of the time, I'm going to take maybe 3 questions, and then we will fill those questions to the panelists accordingly. I'll take you, Susa. Take you, Walter, and then take you, Elizabeth. Susa first, then Walter, then Elizabeth.
Thank you, Prof. It's good to be online. My mom has to leave in 3 minutes, she said. So I just want to make a comment that I am possibly the only person in this forum today that listened to every single word that was said, for the fear of my mom possibly doing a personal Q&A after this. So, so I just wanted to start off with just making that comment. I do have a question to maybe some of the fellow universities, legal advisors, or staff that work with student discipline, if they don't mind getting in contact with me. I am a legal advisor and prosecutor at the University of the Western Cape. So it will be quite interesting for me to see how the other universities deal with student discipline when it comes to academic dishonesty. And thank you so much for the Northwest University for their input. I just want to make a comment towards the panel members and the other parties that have given some insight and concerns about the use of LLMs or AI in the academic sphere. I am using ChatGPT on a daily basis in both my professional and personal life. And I have to just comment to everyone that my use of chat has become so familiar, because it's myself and my business partner that use chat, that chat can differentiate between when it's me speaking and when it's my colleague speaking. So chat knows exactly how to answer me and the type of questions I will ask. So if a student in a specific subject starts training chat from the beginning in how to answer in that person's type of language, it will become almost impossible to detect whether it is the student or AI that is generating these type of documents. I have, like I said, my profile on chat has been so streamlined that chat knows exactly how to answer my questions relating to student discipline, answer my questions relating to contracts, answer my questions with regards to art. So that is the only problem. I don't know if anybody has an idea of that, how to fix that, but I am of the opinion that it's almost impossible if the student starts training the AI model from the start of their studies, especially in their language use. It will be difficult for a lecturer to pick up any AI misuse if the tool is accustomed to the person's use of language and nuance and so forth. Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you very much, Susa, for that. Thanks for that question and the comment. I'll go to you, Walter.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly fine. Yes.
Yes, thank you. The issue of detection, if I may address that, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to detect AI. The most recent studies from the top international groups working in the area of plagiarism and related issues simply indicate that you can't rely on that in any efficient way. Secondly, the most recent publications I've seen, two in the last 2 months, indicate that in very good tests between identifying AI-generated text and non-AI generated texts also indicate that really people have a higher regard for what they can detect, whereas it is not the case in practice. This is the reality that one can't detect effectively. So the question is, how should the nature of the academic practice and the nature of the assessments be changed? I referred in the chat to a book by Ethan Mollick. There's been numerous discussions and seminar webinars with him where he really indicates that he actually asks the student to critique some of the results coming from an LLM. And it's a different way of working with the LLM, because in the end, the companies will expect the student to be able to use LLMs effectively. So he approaches it from that different side of things. Just one further comment, if I may. Some policies say that you can use your Google, but you can't use LLMs. The Google that is in use in the USA provides for many topics a thing called AI overviews right at the start of the results. And that is AI generated. And one can even opt, locally in South Africa, you can opt into that to see what is coming. It can't be switched off. It can't be switched off by the user. There is no Google in the USA without AI overviews at the head of all the findings on a number of topics. They start experimenting with things, but these are the realities. So it is a complex problem. I think we should identify the real extent of what we've got and the possible ways out of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Walter. Thanks for that enlightenment. I'll then take Elizabeth, and then we'll sum up just the three.
Thank you, Prof. Majozi. Thank you.
Hi,
I'm somewhat off the topic. Here's my question.
Yes.
How can we prepare young children to deal with this issue? Never mind us academics and publishers and article writers, because young children already award anthropomorphic characteristics to anything, objects, animals, plants. And I think from the developmental psychology that I know, that it is possible to train children to understand the difference between what is real, in other words, what is in my consciousness and in the rest of reality, and what is my imagination. And I just wondered whether anybody would like to comment on the idea that we should ask the new Minister of Basic Education in South Africa, please, can we have some research on how young children are made AI and large language model sensitive and aware? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for that. Let me start from the tail end of those three questions. I'll start off with that question, Elizabeth, that you've just posed. Throw it back to the panel. I just want to see who among the panelists would be brave enough to take that question from Elizabeth. I don't want to pick on anyone at this stage. How do you prepare the young minds for this really?
I can take it, Prof, and I think it's a valid
Please
question.
come in. Yeah.
Yeah, in the sense that we then need to relook even at our syllabus, at a basic education, because if we can look at what is happening at basic education and higher education, there's sort of disjoint in terms of what learners or students are sort of coming out with and what is expected when they land in higher education institutions. So my view is that we then relook at what are the intended learning outcomes that these learners will then be expected to achieve. Is there then alignment between what they are coming out with what is expected in the job market and also in higher education landscape? And if we can check across the globe, most of the education systems have moved towards skill-based kind of teaching, to say what kind of skills are we imparting these learners with? And I think from that perspective, we will then have an idea. And I think one of the audience also indicated the research that was done about how the people are responding to these AI tools, because we can agree that a lot of these young children are able to operate the gadgets and so forth. But if we bring that into education system, what is it that we're imparting with as part of education, and juxtapose that with demands in the job market, so to say? That is one. And I think until we go through that, we still want to ask this kind of question. The last point that I also want to make is also in terms of as I said, in the Southern Hemisphere, as I think as Walter was saying, what is happening in the US, we are more on the consumption sides of these AI tools compared to the Northern Hemisphere. And up until we also move towards, and if you recall, in 2018, when in the State of the Nation address, the president indicated that they will relook at the curriculum and teach coding and so forth. We have been waiting for that to see it in a large scale. But if you compare what kids in the Singapore and that part of the world are doing and learning, the PlayStations that we buy with exorbitant fees are produced by their peers from that side. So this is how we can sort of want to say level the playing field and also be a part of the rules. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicky, for that. Thanks for that response, indeed. I see your hand up, Dave. Please come in.
I mean, just very quickly, the answer as to what we should be teaching isn't just what we need to teach children, it's what we need to teach adults, and that's critical analysis. And I think that we don't do enough teaching of critical analysis, and that's very problematic now that we have LLMs. So my answer would be quite simply that we have to start with really thinking about critical analysis and what the kinds of tools are that people need to learn. But I think the other answer to that is this question about normative framing, and that's very important for children at an early age. So what are the normative values that we are teaching children at an early age? And I don't think there's enough attention to that. So the children then go into their adult years with a normative framing which is based on stereotypes, which is prejudiced, which is full of bias, which has unsustainable assumptions about the nature of the world. And these are things that, quite honestly, we should ask AI to be generating this normative framework, because I think it's going to do a better job eventually than humanity can do. I mean, we don't have a lot to be proud of, quite honestly. Look at the world at the moment. We have the Ukraine, we have the West Bank, and we have one problem after another. And I think AI might be doing a better job at running the world than we are. I mean, that's obviously an extreme perspective. But I think it's a good idea to ask large language models, develop a normative framework for which we think children should be learning in order to make the world a sustainable place, and see what it comes back with. And I think you'll be surprised by the answers. And yeah, that's...
No, thank you very much, Dave, for that contribution. Any other take from the panelists? If not, I have a question now from both Susa and Walter. By the way, Both of them came from different ends, but they are converging on one point. I won't actually pin my colors on the mast on this one because I have my own view, but I would rather, given that I'm the facilitator, I would rather not expose my position. But it's clear from both Susa and Walter that it looks like it might be just impossible to achieve what we think is possible, and that is to detect whether the material or the information that we have came from AI or not. It looks like it's impossible for various ways. Susa mentioned why, because we can train these to adapt accordingly, you know? And then Walter also came out here with an example of why other people are saying it's better perhaps to encourage students to do this, because to avoid this or discourage them is not going to yield any answer, yield any positive outcome. So I just want to be clear from, before I let you in, Kirsten, I want to hear from the panelists whether that could be the view that it might just be impossible to detect the use of AI where it has not been declared. Is it true? Or it is just a case in point? In other words, we are here because of our knowledge. Perhaps with time, things might change, and ultimately, we might be able to transcend that and be able to detect whether AI is involved or not, where it has not been declared. I have my views on that, so I just want to hear from the panelists as to whether we can accept at this point that we won't be able to do so. And maybe because I've just heard, or we've heard from you now, Nicky, I want to hear from, for example, either Lynn or Anne on that.
So, Toko, I guess, you know, I guess I am on the second speaker's side, that I think we want to encourage our students to use it, but we want it to be responsibly used, because if they're using it, it means that they understand it. It means that they are, you know, tech savvy, and they, you know, and we want them to have the skills in order to make the most use of AI. So we want them to use it. It's the inappropriate use that's the, you know, that's the issue. And, you know, the point about using it for some things, you know, sort of, I guess, more mundane tasks, you know, for some people is perfectly acceptable. So, you know, this sort of idea that we need to detect it all the time and we need to stop people using it, that horse is bolted, I think. And we need to just think about how we are going to integrate this and how we are going to encourage responsible use. You know, I mean, we're sort of talking about this as if, you know, it's a panacea. You know, it actually isn't. There are a lot of people who think, you know, AI generated text is generic, it's uncreative, it uses lots of words to say very little. You know, it's actually, sometimes it's useful to stimulate an idea and then you still put your own slant on it, you know. So it's not as if you've completely outsourced everything, you know, to AI. So it's, I don't think it's a, you know, it's an either or, you know, answer. I think it is a process. It's a dialogue, and it's about how we integrate these tools and encourage responsible use. But will we ever be able to detect, truly speaking? Well, no, I don't. I think we probably have to, you know. So there was another interesting question about people using it to review journals, which has another set of problems, because when you are sent an article to review, it is confidential, and the fact that people are putting that or using LLMs to write a review is very problematic, because that goes into a server. It you know, it's then available. I mean, the sort of issues around privacy and data protection, you know, are all broken, because you're not supposed to share that manuscript with anybody. But at the same time, you can see how useful it would be, because during a review process, you want to see if somebody else has published this. You want to see if it's controversial or if it's, you know, goes against the grain. So, you know, it's those kinds of dynamics that somehow we need to work through and make use of the tool, but without compromising, I guess, you know, things like privacy and ethics. So there's no simple answer, I guess, and that's why it does have to, you know, we keep having to just have these kinds of discussions until we And we'll never figure it out probably because it's always a step ahead of us.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. And maybe just to on that one before I allow Kirsten, Annie.
Yeah, I do want to emphasize, as soon as we do the policing route or prosecution route or things like that, I think that's a really, really negative way of approaching AI. And I started my presentation of saying we should embrace it. And the only way we can avoid totally unethical use of AI is having sit down invigilated assessments, but that's not possible. So if we, as lecturers, expect from the students, or if we as editors of journals expect of authors not to use AI, and we say that, there should be a way then of, if we set that expectation, a way of not policing it, but a way of that we still attempt to pick it up. That's my answer to Professor Claes. And the tools are, it's always falling behind, but they're catching up. So the question would be, and there I agree with Nicky, are we going to follow that route completely by looking the whole time at assessments that's prone to being used by students, using AI by students for completing these assessments? Or are we going to think more creative about how we teach and design our curriculum, etc.? And then the same applies in the research area. We cannot just look at the teaching, learning aspects, but new knowledge should be much more critical evaluated, because we'll get an overdose of AI presented stuff, especially if we open for it and say, yes, let AI be embraced. And that's why I started, and how I started my presentation.
No, thanks, Annie, for that. And then Kirsten will be drawing to a close now, given the time limits. Kirsten, please come in.
Thanks, colleagues. Very refreshing, vibrant discussion. Thanks for everything. I really want to reiterate, everything that was said. I just want to make a few points on AI detection. There's a lot of controversy around AI detection tools, and really it doesn't work. But if you use a combination of things, AI detection, plagiarism, and checking for quality references, the biggest fallout with AI-generated references, and I'm now specifically looking at cases where people generate, research papers. One needs to learn how to review references. One of the easiest ways to detect whether something is AI-generated is that it's weak. We know how to detect weak science. Also, many of these tools eat its own output, so you get something called AI pollution. So as a result, there's a lot less variation. And for us in South Africa, what is being generated is decontextualized unless you obviously train the tool. So there's a strong worldview bias. There's more and more AI pollution. In other words, then less variation. And what we need to look at is a combination of things. As I said, AI detection, but I think the most consistent one is checking the quality of references that go in. And I want to coin the idea of avoidance strategies, avoiding weak science feeding our work. And it goes beyond just unethically generated AI stuff. It talks all kinds of unethical scientific papers. Avoidance strategies, that's what we need to look at. So thanks everyone.
But thanks for that advice, Kirsten. Now that I don't see any hand from where I'm standing. I don't know if there's a new hand. I can just give the panelists just one more round to respond to Kirsten, or do we all agree? I fully agree, by the way, with Kirsten's position on this. He's not disagreeing with any of what has been said. Just to say that there could be a way of detecting whether the information we have was derived from AI or not. So any comment from the panelists on that before we close?
Maybe on my side, as I'm parting short, colleagues, and thanks for this wonderful engagement. Is then to say we shouldn't be too much obsessed to run against, or to run behind the detection. But is then to say, what are the new creativities that we bring about in terms of our teaching strategies, our learning strategies? Because if I can think, while I was listening to all of this conversation, if we are then so pedantic about all of these measures, what is wrong with the AI-generated content, for example? And once we start to unpack that question, we'll then probably come with better ideas. And as I said, some of those ideas could be to relook in terms of what are the new demands in terms of skill market. There was a talk of potential areas of collaboration. And as one, I think it's Walwyn who indicated analogy of the waves. I mean, the globalization akin to waves and so forth, to say, do you go with the flow or you go against? And I think dialogues like this will sort of assist us in conveying to a sort of common point, although we don't always have to have common view of everything. That's my take. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Nicky, that closing comment. Just maybe 1 minute from each of the panelists. I'll go to you, Anne, just to close.
Sorry, I struggled there to find the unmute. Yeah, I think it's an ongoing discussion, and I think it's good that we have it. We need to look for solutions. The field is changing so quickly, and I think yeah, we do need to learn from each other. So thank you for this discussion. Yes.
Thanks. And then from you, Lynn, just closing remarks.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously on the smart work side of things. I think it's an exciting time. I think AI is transforming our world. It's more than a tool. I mean, it's changing how we do science. It's changing how we write. It's changing how we think, actually. And I think we have to make the best use of that. And that's not to say that I'm using this uncritically. I'm aware of all the other, the other aspects. But it's a very powerful tool that I think is going to help us solve a lot of problems. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Lynn. Dave, just there, 1 minute closing remark, if any.
Okay, just 2 points. The first is that I think it's very helpful if what we all accept is that everything is a construct. And when you start with that, then you end up in a different place in terms of what is evidence-based and what is hallucinatory. So that's my first point. And it's a big leap. And I think we all have to make an effort on that. And then the second one, which I think is also very important, is if you get a chance and you can stomach the mathematics, read the book it's called The Book of Why, and it's by someone called Pierce. And he got the Nobel Prize for the background algorithms in large language models. And it's an interesting read, and particularly interesting in respect of causation. So how do we understand causation? So good luck with that, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dave. I think we've come to really the close. I'm looking at time. We are 2 minutes over the scheduled time. I think we've done well, given the amount of the volume of information that we've had to contend with. And on my side, it's very clear that by and large, we all agree that this is untenable. I mean, sorry, this is irreversible. We only can go forward from here. So there are pros and cons in the world that we find ourselves in. Where we don't agree is where the boundaries lie between the pros and cons. And I think that will be an evolving kind of a discussion or dialogue going forward. And that is why we have these deliberations here. But it is clear that we have to live with the LLMs and AI and adapt at a much quicker pace than they're evolving for us to be ahead of time. And thank you very much for everyone that attended, who is still there at this stage. I want to again reiterate my gratitude to all the panelists. I think this was really intellectually invoking for everyone who did attend. And again, thank you, ASSAf, for really thinking of such an interesting topic. I'm sure that the next webinar series will be equally entertaining. We are looking forward to that. Thanks, everyone, ASSAf team, for your arrangement. And with those words, I would say good afternoon again. See you again next time. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.